welcome to the C Film Center, home of the Denver Film Society. How's everyone doing this evening? Great. Woo. Well, thanks so much for coming out for our series, The Tragedies of David Lean. My name is Matt Campbell, one of the programmers of the Denver Film Society, and I'm really excited about this partnership that we have with DeFi, which is a Denver Project for Humanistic Inquiry. It's a great title, but hard to remember. I'm not going to talk at all anymore because we do have a long film, and we are going to have a very enlightening introduction for said film. So now if you could please help me welcome professors of philosophy Adam Graves and Sean Morris.
Thank you, Matthew. I really appreciate it. And thank you, everybody, for coming out tonight. Out of curiosity, how many of you were here last week for Brief Encounter? Can I ask how many of you have seen Bridge on the River Kwai?
Everybody.
Everybody, yes. Even my 12-year-old son didn't raise his hand, even though I know I've seen it. So, anyway, so great. Well, thank you so much. We're really excited also about this partnership with the C Film Center, one of the great cultural institutions in Denver. If you don't know, if you're not familiar with DeFi, check us out at defi.org. We're a public humanities organization that sponsors and hosts events similar to this at various cultural institutions throughout the city. So check us out. We're really excited about this. This film is obviously a kind of a landmark film in the history of cinema. Certainly it is also in the history of David Lean's own career. It was kind of in some sense his first international blockbuster success. I don't like to hype films before people, now you've all seen it, so this is no longer funny, okay, but I was gonna say, I don't like to hype films before people have seen them. But, you know, incidentally, of course, the film won 7 Academy Awards, including all the important ones like Best Picture, Best Director, Best Actor, Best Cinematography, Best Screenplay, Best Soundtrack. But anyways, it's an okay movie. So I guess I'll hand the microphone to my colleague Sean to see if he has some thoughts, or should I begin by talking a little bit about the central character of the film? So in conversations with some of my students, and I'm teaching a film course at MSU Denver through the Honors Program, and I want to make a shout out to the Honors Program for helping sponsor this event as well. Thank you. We were talking a little bit about the philosophical significance of this particular picture, and one framework for thinking, I think, about the central characters is in terms of this kind of basic dichotomy in contemporary moral thought between consequentialism on the one hand and a kind of duty-based ethics, what they call deontology, deon being the Greek for duty, on the other. And obviously, consequentialism is a theory which basically claims that an action is good if and only if the consequences of that action result in maximizing pleasure and minimizing pain for the greatest number of sentient beings. But the point is that we determine whether or not an action is right or wrong based on the ultimate consequences of that action. And that theory is, I think is a kind of a commonsensical one. But there are obviously some problems with it. One of those problems is that pleasure is not, in every case, inherently good. It's not an intrinsic good. I can imagine, in fact, a number of instances where people who I really dislike happen to be happy, and I find that to be a problem from a moral standpoint. So it's not that pleasure is intrinsically good, that's one question. The other thing is it doesn't seem to take into consideration an agent's intention, which oftentimes seems to count even more than the consequences of an action when determining whether or not a person has behaved properly or improperly. And these worries about the nature of consequentialism have motivated another theory of ethics, which is basically an ethics that revolves around this notion of duty, committing ourselves to our duty, performing our moral obligations, as it were, for their own sake. And I think that Colonel Nicholson, the main character of this film, is obviously an adherent of this particular duty-based conception of morality. Now, duty-based ethics come in all different shapes and sizes, and some people will claim that the duties, the laws, are as it were given through divine command. Others, like Immanuel Kant, will claim that they have their origins in reason itself. And perhaps for someone like Colonel Nicholson, it's the Geneva Convention that provides the framework for thinking about what one's duties are. But if that's all this film were about, if it were just kind of, as it were, presenting us with a particular character committed to this duty-based conception of ethics, I think it wouldn't be that interesting. What I think the film does a good job of is pointing to some of the pitfalls, to some of the problems that arise when one is committed absolutely to carrying out one's duty. One historically interesting, from my standpoint, conception or conception of the problem that arises when thinking about moral obligation in terms of a law is one that was initially expressed by Paul and has a kind of a venerable tradition that runs up through Kant and into the 20th century in the psychoanalytic thought of Jacques Lacan. And that's this idea that the law itself can give rise to sin or can give rise to evil. And that's partly because when we're told that something is off limits, like Adam was told in the Garden of Eden, as it were, then of course we immediately want that thing. It's what's forbidden, it's the forbiddenness of what's forbidden that makes us, as it were, desire it. So that's one pitfall. The other pitfall, it comes when somebody becomes so, as it were, scrupulously concerned with carrying out one's duty, that's all one cares about. So this obsessional kind of concern or fixation with duty is something that I think we see in Colonel Nicholson. And obviously, since everybody's more or less seen the film, I don't think I'm giving it away. Obviously, he's not really concerned with building this bridge for the sake of what it will, for the sake of the means that it will, allow for it. It's not the usefulness of the bridge that concerns Colonel Nicholson. Rather, it is the fact that we are, as it were, building a monument that expresses our commitment to our duty to our queen, or whatever the case may be. So I think that there's some really interesting and subtle symbolic moments in this film. One of them, and I hope I'm not, again, I don't think I'm giving away too much, but I just want you to look out for it, is that Nicholson has this thing called a swagger stick. It's like one of these things that the colonels used to carry around. I don't know what they would do with them, beat their people.
It's like a riding crop.
Oh, it's a riding crop. Okay, so anyway, so he carries around this stick, and of course there are critical things that happen to the stick. Sato at one point takes it and breaks it. He then replaces it with something else, like a twig, which is an interesting kind of analog to the original stick, but within the context of captivity. But then at a certain moment when Nicholson is reflecting on his life and the significance of his life and what it all amounts to, what his, as it were, obsessional concern with duty has, as it were, amounted to, as he's reflecting on this, I think two things are important to note. One, it is a touching moment in the film, but it's also a moment of vanity and pride, I think, because he's really thinking about his legacy, how he'll be remembered, and whether or not it all, as it were, paid off in the end. And at that critical moment, of course, what happens to a swagger stick? Well, you keep an eye out for it. So.
Yeah.
Thanks, Adam. I think the setup is good with consequentialism and deontology. You've talked a lot about Nicholson, right, and there are a few main characters, but the other big one, who in some ways is, I think, the opposite of both Nicholson as well as the Japanese commandant, is Shears, William Holden's American character, and he's the only American, perhaps, I think, right? Which is
it might be worth noting that he wasn't in the original source material, but the Hollywood studio, wanted to have an American character, so they hired somebody like from a Western, it seems, almost.
Yeah, interesting. Yeah, I read the book, but it was a long time ago. But so he seems to really represent a kind of maybe stereotype of an American in many ways. But aside from that, back to the consequentialism and deontology, there's a sense in which Shears' character, within the context of the war and who the enemy is, from a consequentialist standpoint, he kind of does what's right. But on the other hand, I myself, and I think this would be true, I think of others, would be that I don't really admire him a whole lot. There seems to be something lacking in him, and it goes back to this idea of intentions. Why does he do certain things? Well, because he would like better treatment in the prison camp, because he would like to sit at the hospital and be surrounded by the nurses and things. I mean, like, he doesn't really do anything out of a sense of duty, it seems. And that seems to be importantly lacking in his character, as opposed to Nicholson, who, like, again, things can go wrong there too, but I feel like there's a lot more that I admire in Nicholson in a sense. So.
I want to chime in about two things. One, also another element of the story that was, as it were, thrust upon Lean. It wasn't in the original screenplay that Lean actually more or less wrote, even though he didn't get credit for it. The woman that Holden's character kind of has this romantic fling with is also the studio basically stipulated that there has to be a white woman in this film. So this is kind of one of these moments that Lean thought he just absolutely detested, this love scene on the beach. But there was something. Oh, and the other thing's kind of interesting. Thinking about this just from the perspective of the director and the vision of the film. Nicholson's character was a point of contestation between Alec Guinness, or as my son will know him, Obi-Wan Kenobi, and Guinness himself hates that, or hated that, and Lean. So Lean thought that Nicholson was just a bore, that if we had him over for a dinner party, it would just be a complete yawn. And Guinness was kind of upset that he wanted. That Lean wanted him to play a bore. He said, "So you want me to play a bore?" And I think Guinness captured something, the depths of that particular character, so that we understand that he is a bore in some sense, but that but in fact it's his kind of boorishness that makes him interesting. Part of that is that his particular kind of, I don't know, his commitment to the Geneva Convention, to the kind of the code of the military, is obviously the means that allows him and his fellow soldiers, it's the means that allows them to endure the trials and tribulations of enslavement. This is another interesting point: is how can one be free under the conditions of enslavement? And the freedom, I think, that Nichols sought was a freedom by way of law and commitment to law.
Right, I think, I don't remember the exact lines and things, but right, this is the whole dispute between him and the Japanese is, right, they can only be prisoners to the Japanese commandant, but Nicholson's whole point is that they will remain soldiers, right? And so it's this commitment to, again, like, we will be prisoners of war, but guided by something like the Geneva Convention again. So, So.
Well, it's a long film, so I think we should now just kind of let you guys watch it. One thing I guess to keep an eye on, what I'm going to be looking for, is in the character of Sato, what his particular moral code is. Because he clearly has one, and it's not the Geneva Convention.
But I think in general, it's a lot closer to Nicholson than Holden, for sure. Yeah, like, so there's a sense in which, in the end, Nicholson and Sato are much more united than, say, somebody like Shears is kind of the oddball of the three.
Yes. The pragmatic American hedonist, more or less. Yeah.
With a great deal of tradition.
There's a lot of tradition, say, in England and Japan that's shared, as opposed to the Wild West perhaps has a different kind of tradition.
Well, thank you. Now, as an American hedonist myself, I'm going to go eat my popcorn. It's a long film, as you know, about 2.5 hours, I believe, approximately. So help yourself to popcorn. And afterwards, the bar might be closed, but the concession stand will still be open, where you can purchase beer. And if you want to stick around and chat about the film and tell us what you think about it, and what this movie's really about, we'll be there for a little while. So thank you so much for coming out. Really appreciate it. And see you next week for Lawrence of Arabia.